We've all seen accidents happen, right? A slip on a wet floor, a minor fender bender. But have you ever stopped to wonder how the law actually decides who's at fault? Well, the answer isn't buried in some dusty old textbook. It was actually built piece by piece from some of the strangest, most fascinating real-life events you can possibly imagine.
So get this, a snail in your ginger beer, a cricket ball that sails out of a stadium and hits someone on the street. Believe it or not, these aren't just made-up scenarios. They're real cases that force the courts to answer a really fundamental question. When someone gets hurt, who's responsible? And the answers they came up with created the very legal framework we still use to figure all this stuff out today.
You see, proving negligence isn't as simple as just pointing a finger. The law says you have to build a case, link by link, through this four-part chain: duty, breach, causation, and remoteness. And here's the kicker: if even one of these links is missing, the whole claim just falls apart. So let's build this chain together, starting with that very first link.
All right, our first, and you could argue most important, link is the duty of care. I mean, before anyone can be held responsible for something, the law first has to say they had a responsibility to be careful in the first place. And this whole idea, it started to take shape in a small cafe over a very, very unfortunate drink order.
Okay, picture the scene. It's Paisley, Scotland, 1928. A woman named Maid Donahue is at a cafe with a friend. Her friend buys her an ice cream float made with ginger beer. Now, the bottle is made of this dark, opaque glass, so you can't see inside it at all. She drinks some, and then goes to pour the rest into her glass, and out plops the decomposing remains of a snail. Seriously, she gets sick, and she decides to sue the manufacturer of the ginger beer.
The court's decision in this case gave us this single, incredibly powerful idea: the neighbor principle. The court asked, so who, in the eyes of the law, is my neighbor? And the answer was absolutely revolutionary. It's anyone who is so closely and directly affected by what I do that I should reasonably have them in mind. The ginger beer maker didn't know Mrs. Donahue, of course, but they should have foreseen that their carelessness could seriously harm the person who eventually drank their product.
And just like that, the modern duty of care was born. All because of a snail in a bottle, manufacturers now have a clear legal obligation to all of us who use their products. They owe us a duty to be careful. And boom, link one of our chain is established.
So just establishing a duty of care is only the first step. You also have to prove that the duty was actually broken or breached. So when does being a little bit careless cross the line and become a legal breach? For the answer to that, we're going to head from a cafe in Scotland to a cricket ground in England.
Check this out. A batsman hits an absolutely incredible shot. The ball sails out of the ground, clears a massive 17-foot fence, and hits a woman, a Miss Stone, who was just standing on a quiet side street. She sues the cricket club. I mean, they clearly had a duty to protect people nearby, but did they actually breach it?
The court had to do this kind of balancing act. On one side of the scale, you have the probability of harm happening. Here, it was incredibly low. A ball had only left the ground like 6 times in 30 years. On the other side was the burden of doing something about it. What more could the club realistically do? Stop playing cricket altogether? Build a ridiculously high fence? The court decided the risk was so tiny that the club had already taken reasonable precautions.
In this case, really helped define what a breach of duty is. It's not about preventing every single accident that could possibly happen. It's about meeting the standard of a reasonable person. Someone who balances the risk of something bad happening against the cost and difficulty of preventing it. The cricket club acted reasonably, so they didn't breach their duty. And with that, our second link is locked in place.
Okay, so we've got a duty and we've got a breach, but that's still not enough. You have to connect that breach directly to the harm that was suffered. This brings us to our final 2 links, which are really closely related: causation and remoteness. The carelessness has to be the actual cause of the injury, and that injury has to have been a foreseeable consequence.
Our next story is a tragic one, but it perfectly explains causation. 3 night watchmen feel sick after drinking some tea. They head to the hospital, but the doctor on duty, well, he refuses to see them and just tells a nurse to send them home. So sad. One of the men dies a few hours later, and it turns out the tea had been laced with arsenic.
Now, the doctor was clearly negligent. He had a duty of care, and he breached it by not even examining the patient. Seems like an open and shut case, right? Well, not so fast. The law makes us ask this one crucial follow-up question, which introduces something called the but-for test.
The court had to ask, what would have happened anyway? Medical experts showed the arsenic poisoning was so severe that by the time the man got to the hospital,
No treatment in the world could have saved him. In other words, but for the doctor's negligence, the patient still would have died. And that means the doctor's breach was not the legal cause of death. The third link in our chain, causation, was broken.
All right, finally, let's look at our last link, remoteness. Even if you cause some damage, you're only on the hook for the damage that was a foreseeable result of your actions. Our final case takes us all the way to Sydney Harbor. A ship, called the Wagon Mound, negligently spills a ton of furnace oil into the water, and it spreads over to a nearby wharf where some welders are working.
So a spark from the welding gear hits some floating debris, which then sets the oil slick on fire, and the fire completely destroys the wharf. Now, the ship was obviously liable for the damage from the oil just mucking up the wharf, but what about the fire? Well, the court looked at the science at the time, and it was widely believed that this type of oil just wouldn't catch fire on water. Because of that, the fire damage was considered too remote a consequence of the spill. The final link, remoteness, is all about foreseeability.
So, a snail in a bottle, a cricket ball over a fence, a cup of poisoned tea, a fire in a harbor. These seemingly random, bizarre accidents all pieced together a powerful and really logical toolkit for figuring out who's responsible when things go wrong.
Let's recap. Donahue v. Stevenson gave us the duty of care with the neighbor principle. Bolton v. Stone defined breach with the reasonable person test. Barnett v. Chelsea established the critical but-for test for causation. And the Wagon Mound gave us the foreseeability test for remoteness. 4 cases, 4 principles, and that completes the entire chain of negligence.
But this story isn't over, not by a long shot. How does this framework, built over a century ago, apply to our world today? When a self-driving car crashes, who had the duty of care? The owner, the programmer, the car manufacturer? What's the reasonable person standard for an AI? These old cases gave us the building blocks, but it's up to us to figure out how to build with them for the challenges of the future.